Check. Okay, let's go ahead and find our seats. We're going to go and show this video, Memorial Stones. I believe this is the last one. Next week, we will be starting a new Bible study series, Sunday school series. Pastor Stevens will be teaching on that. The Secret Place of the Most High. This is a study on spiritual warfare. And it's going to be a great study, amen. So we could be looking forward to that. But this is the last one. So this is 58 minutes. So we're going to get right into it, amen. This is the last of the series of Memorial Stones. Go ahead and show the tape, amen.
Finish out our series on Memorial Stones is the last lesson. Got a lot to get through, so listen quickly. Let's begin today's lesson. First issue I want to talk about is the preparation for succession. I am telling you in all of this series of our church and the founder of our fellowship, my father, Wayman Mitchell, he had led us from 1970 and on. And so a wise leader prepares for the future. A wise leader is preparing for the day when he will be gone. And so in order to prepare, a wise leader has to develop a successor, someone who will continue the work once they're gone. Years ago, I had someone ask me, what will I do one day when Pastor Mitchell's gone and he has chosen a successor? And the nature of the question is, of course, because of my relationship with my father, how would I handle when he chose a successor? And my answer was, I will assume that just like Pastor Mitchell heard from God and had wisdom in everything else, that he heard from God and used wisdom in choosing a successor, and I will get behind that choice. Of course, I had no idea at the time that that would be me. I assumed that would be somebody else. Lisa and I went to South Africa in 1997. And I told the last lesson, God supernaturally helped us to establish a church there, became a conference center. We built a building, we planted churches. God helped us wonderfully. 2004, we hit the 7-year mark of being in South Africa, and I began to feel unsettled, restless. We loved it in South Africa. I was not dissatisfied in any way. I had felt this feeling before. I knew that God was preparing us to move on and do something else. I had no direction for that. Talked to Lisa, she agreed. Felt the same. And so in the absence of direction, we had been 7 years in South Africa. We had spent 2 years before that in Australia. So we had been 9 years away from America. And so we decided it would be best to return to the United States with no direction, just using logic. We only had one church in Miami, Florida at that time. So Lisa and I just kind of roughly agreed, let's go pioneer in Miami, Florida. Right after making that decision between ourselves, Robert Polacco, one of the other missionaries, he asked me to go with him to a mechanic that was near my house. I went with him. This is a man is a total non-Christian, chain smoking. He hears our accent and asked us while he's looking at the car, "What are you doing here?" And we told him we're preachers. We're here to tell people about Jesus, help people build a work for God. And the man looked directly at me. I don't know if he pointed with his cigarette, but he looked at me and he said, "You should be in Turkey. You should go to the nation of Turkey." He didn't say it to Robert. He wasn't talking like in general. No, he said to me, "You need to go to Turkey." Robert laughed like, yeah, Greg, you need to go to Turkey. Like that was a great joke. I thought that was weird that guy did that. When I got home, I told Lee, "You're not going to believe what happened." And the guy looked right at me and he said, you should be in Turkey. And Lisa's eyes got wide. She said, "Greg, this morning when I was praying, God spoke to me and said, we need to go to Turkey." And I said, "No." I had no interest in, we'd already been 9 years overseas. It ever occurred to me, and I just said no. So I thought, I'm going to call Dad. I'm going to call my pastor. I'm going to tell him. I said, this mechanic, that happened. And then Lisa said, and what I was expecting him to say was, don't be stupid. You've already been overseas 9 years. It's time to come home. That's not what he said. Instead, he said, could be God. You should go check it out. And I was like, no, that's the wrong answer. And I struggled. I want to tell you, I did not want to do this. I dutifully booked a ticket to go and scout the land in Turkey, to go to numbers of cities and look around for the prospects of pioneering. I still remember to this day flying on British Airways from Johannesburg to Istanbul, Turkey. I was wrestling with this, but I had made a deal years before. God, I'll do anything you want me to do. And on that plane, I just made my seat an altar, and I prayed and said, God, I do not want to go to Turkey, but clearly you're doing something. If you want me to go to Turkey, Lisa and I surrender, we will go. Landed, looked around Istanbul, met a number of people, went to Ankara and a few different places. Near the end of that trip in scouting, I felt God speak to me, this is not for you. It could have saved a lot of money and time if you'd have told me that back in Johannesburg. I thought that was really weird. Why would God do that supernaturally to get me here? Don't know. Went back, flew back to Johannesburg. It was only weeks, maybe a month later. It was conference. Dad came to conference, and one morning he said he wanted to talk to me. Went in the office, and he spoke to me about the future. At that time, he said, I'm 75 years old, and it's time to prepare for my succession. And he told me what was needed in being a leader. He explained why some men, some leaders would not be suitable. For instance, he felt having someone who had no connection with Prescott, that would probably not work well. And then he stunned me. He said, I prayed about it, and I want you to succeed me. And he said he had heard from God, but apart from that, using holy logic, he explained his reasoning. This wasn't pulled out of the air or simply because I was related. He explained experience. I have done literally everything you can do in ministry in our fellowship. I started as a concert director on staff. I have pioneered churches. We've taken churches. I have evangelized. Missionary experience, Dad felt was crucial because we have such a huge missions involvement. We had spent 7 years in South Africa, 5 years or so in Australia in ministry outside of America. He felt that was important. He said a major factor is my wife, Lisa. He said Lisa is ideal as a leader's wife because she doesn't fight with people. And she knows how to keep her mouth shut. We never have to clean up problems that Lisa has created. And he said that is a major factor in that. So he said, I want you to come to Prescott, be on staff. And in his mind, he said it will take 5 years before people accept you as the leader. That was wildly optimistic, but nonetheless, I'm trying to describe to you how stunned I was at this. And I said, okay, I trust you. You hear from God on a level I do not. So, but I said, you have changed your mind before. Of course, I've explained in this series, there were other men that he put in place here and didn't work out. I said, look, at any time, if you ever change your mind, no problem. You tell me, Lisa and I will go do something else. No hard feelings, but okay, we'll do it. I went home and told Lisa. We talked about this, and we said the essence is my parents need help. Dad's 75, Mom was 71 probably at that time. And so he said, we will go serve the Prescott Church. We will serve them. I didn't actually believe that taking over would come to pass. I thought at some point Dad would say, on reflection, we found somebody better. But nonetheless, we said we're going to do our best, and we did that. We came here in November of 2004. We served my mother in her capacity, not only in life, but in her roles in the church until she passed in 2016. We served my father until his dying breath in 2020. But being on staff, November of 2004, from that time, Dad began to prepare me. He talked over every decision. He talked over every crises that came up in time, because he wanted me to know how he thought, not just what he did. Why did he do it? So he explained in great detail how he approached things. He talked over decisions that he was making. He talked about people conflicts and all kinds of things. At times he would test me. He would ask me, what do you think that I should do? These are in things that are beyond my experience. He wanted to know if I was thinking like him. Was I approaching it like him? There were times he put very difficult, disciplined decisions on me, made me handle it for the purpose of character development and testing me in that way. Involved me in conflict meetings. In leadership, sometimes you have conflict meetings. I got to see how he handled those. He involved me in international church planting meetings, in the decision of why are we going to send a worker and where, and he involved me in all of that. I asked lots and lots of questions. That's how you learn. I asked about the past. I asked, how do you approach this? I asked what he saw in the future. And then, of course, Dad, as a wise leader, he gave me exposure, wide exposure. I began preaching permanently on a nighttime slot, Wednesday night of conference. I probably started doing that in 2006 or 7, from my record, probably 2006. Clearly, there were other men that were better preachers. Dad was, number one, letting me develop in preaching. But number two, he was sending a message, and he wisely did that. If by the time I took over, if anyone was surprised by that, you probably didn't do very well in school either. You probably missed some things, because he was clearly sending a message. So that is preparation for succession. Let's talk secondly about the Australian rebellion. It's fitting in this final lesson that we talk about Australia again. So central to my father's ministry, and of course my life and ministry as well. I'm thinking 1998, a man took over the church in Perth, West Australia, that we originally planted in 1978. Now it's located in a place called Beachboro, that's just a suburb of Perth. This man then became the leader of all Australian works in Australia, and internationally they have a wide number of works all around the world. But this was a problem, because he immediately began to shift the church in unhealthy ways. One of the things he did was that he shifted the emphasis of the church to money, because that was his heart. I was with him one day, and he told me out of the blue, made this statement, I'm basically a millionaire. Like, I wasn't asking that, and I don't know if you are aware, that's probably not, that's rude. Just be telling people, but what does the Bible say? Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. That was what he loved, was money, investment properties, and that's what he talked. And so he began to put that spirit in the church. This was something very noticeable to Lisa and I. Remember, that's our home church. This is where we were trained. That's where we were sent out from. The church in Perth. Now to come, we have family and friends in the church, or we come back for a visit. And to see, when we left, it was evangelism, discipleship, doing the will of God. And now you come back and people are talking about money, investment properties, and and whatever. This man proselyted in a large group of people from another church. They were Romanian Pentecostals, already existing Christians, a large group of them. He proselyted in. They were not like us, but they were numbers, which were important to him. He actively would pull on people from other fellowship churches to get them to move there. What happens in leadership is you get people, they contact leaders because there is a conflict with their pastor. There's a problem. They don't understand something. They don't like something. So they call, and it's the job of a leader. What you want to do, ideally, is to fix that problem so they stay in the church. That is not what happened at all. Anybody who called with a problem in your church, very soon they would wind up moving to Perth, because he was actively, he had a way of getting these people to think that the best plan for their life. And so what was happening, the numbers are growing, but they're proselytes and transplants. It's not conversion. Church planting slowed. He was planting other people's men. There would be people announced at conference, but they weren't his men. He was planting other people's men. And so while things are changing, Pastor Mitchell was very gracious to this man. He believed the best. My father was not fooled. He knew that there were problems in his spirit, but Dad was believing for the best. He was praying and hoping that this man would come around and start doing right. And one day in a conversation with Joe Campbell, telling, Joe Campbell seeing the problems and, Pastor, this guy is not doing right. And Dad said, I know, but I'm working with him and whatever. Joe Campbell made an all-time classic statement. I'll put it on the screen. He said, the problem, Pastor Mitchell, is that it's just not in him. And that described this man classically. There are people, you can have problems, but if basically the heart of our fellowship and the will of God is in there, you can correct problems. Joe Campbell said, but it's not in him. Working with somebody, if it's not in there, you're not going to fix that. And that was prophetic, very, very classic. This man was rebellious. He began to speak against Pastor Mitchell, which is what rebels do. They always drop seeds of rebellion. He spoke against the fellowship, and what he was trying to do is in Australia and the churches in the UK and under his area of ministry, he was trying to turn them away from the fellowship. He and his wife lied. Oh my goodness, they lied. Remember the lesson I've repeated several times? Rebels lie. And this is on a steroid level of lying. This is 2023 when I'm telling you. This year, it's been 14, 15 years since the man was gone. This year, on a number of occasions, just a few weeks ago, I still to this day have people tell me lies that he said. Like incredibly, lies about Pastor Mitchell that were not true, about American leaders in general, or even about me. And the idea of doing that was he was trying to put American leadership in a bad light. He was using a strategy of rebellion that often people in other nations use. He was using nationalism. People who love their country, they naturally are protective of their country, right? So he was using nationalism. He would drop these seeds, and a mantra that he would repeat was, we have to protect Australia against the day that Pastor Mitchell is gone. Because when Pastor Mitchell is gone, it's all going to go to hell. It's going to get bad. So we have to protect. It's for the Aussies. We got to protect against the day Pastor Mitchell is gone. There were numbers of conversations that were had with this man by Pastor Mitchell, other leaders. There were numbers of meetings that were held. There were numbers of confrontations that took place. It became very clear this man was heading for rebellion. This was going to end ugly. The point when a rebel lies, the point when a rebel seeds and tries to turn people, it's because they're planning on leaving. And that became absolutely clear. But here's the problem, is that you have to, while trying to protect, you have to protect people at the same time. So even though everything within you may want to tell people, listen, he's a dirty dog rebel, you can't do that. Because you have to have people survive spiritually. If you just come in and say, this guy's a devil, you make everybody suspicious of everything they're doing. The problem is, if he's ever gone, they will just transfer that suspicion to the new guy. So this is a balance. Lisa and I, it was a struggle because we had family. We had to bite our tongue. We never badmouthed and openly told family or friends what we actually thought, because we were trying to preserve their salvation. And that's what Pastor Mitchell did as well. We reached a tipping point in Australia where it became clear something had to be done. Darrell Elliott came into the church. He was actually from Geraldton originally. He had been a missionary for a number of years in New Zealand. So now he came into the church and he realized that something was wrong. He realized the same thing that I had told Pastor Mitchell when I would go for family visits and would see the church in a regular service now. I said, he came to this conclusion. The problem is it's very different than it is at conference. Conference, you have everybody there, it's excitement, it's like, woo, we're doing the will of God, but then it's in the regular services. And he said, no, something is changing, it's very unhealthy. Darrell came to, I can't remember if it was when Pastor Mitchell came there for a conference or he came here. He asked Pastor Mitchell, he finally became so troubled, he asked Pastor Mitchell, is this man who is the leader, is he in right relationship with you? And again, my father was gracious, trying to protect him, preserve. He did not openly just said, nope, he's a dirty dog rebel. But Darrell understood this man is not in right relationship with Pastor Mitchell, so we're in trouble. He began to see that what the man was doing was wrong, and he personally made a decision for our children and for future generations. I am going to have to make a stand. This man called Darrell one day. Darrell would have been one of the older pastors, was attended leadership meetings there in Australia. The man who was a leader called one day. He was mad at another leader and was rallying. He wanted to terminate him. He wanted to remove him. And so he was calling Darrell to get his support so that he could kill the other guy. And Darrell asked him a question. He said, do you mind if I call Pastor Mitchell and ask his opinion? There was silence, and the man said, well, that depends on what you're going to tell him. And so, but it became clear that for him to call his pastor, the leader's pastor, Pastor Mitchell, to ask for his advice, that would not be perceived well. But Darrell called. Pastor Mitchell happened to be out of town, so he wound up, got a hold of me. I was the one, got the message, and I called him back. He asked very direct questions, and so now he was explaining what was troubling him, the things that were happening, and I then began to explain the full perspective of all that had been going on and in there. And so he wound up having a conversation with this leader and told him directly that he felt he was wrong, not in right relationship. The moment he did that, he began to be targeted by him. Very interesting, in the July 2008 conference here in Prescott, you know, the leaders pray for, when my dad was alive, they prayed for him as the leader of the fellowship every time. That would be the final act of the conference. July of 2008, Pastor Paul Stevens, one of our leaders in our fellowship, Board of Elders member, gave Pastor Mitchell a word, and he said, on an international level, in the next 6 months, God is going to sort out some problems that have been troubling you. That was a powerful word. I want you to see, I'm showing you pictures from my dad's Bible. I want you to show you, there's a fascinating picture. I want you to see here that verse 18, which is underlined, let the lying lips be put to silence, which speak grievous things proudly and contemptuously against the righteous. He put this man's name, Vickery. That is the man's name, David Vickery. August of 2008, I want you to look down at the bottom. The Lord preserves the faithful and plentifully rewarded the proud doer. Look at what my dad wrote. This is now a prayer that he wrote in August of 2008. Let me see it, Lord, this year. Fascinating. Pastor Stephen said within 6 months, it's going to be sorted out. That was, my dad grieved for Australia. He loved the Perth church, loved Australia and the works. And he said, Lord, sorting out lying lips and preserving the faithful and reward the proud doer. He said, oh Lord, let that happen this year. Some leaders came and met with Dad. We had the men's rally at one of the high schools in Phoenix at that time. Numbers of us, there was probably 5 or 6 leaders. We met with Dad in December of 2008 to discuss all that it was boiling very heavily. It was clearly headed for rebellion. And the advice of all of the leaders was, Pastor Mitchell, you need to remove that man. If you don't, he's going to take all of these churches out of the fellowship. They said, remove him. And Dad's initial response was, no, if I reach in and remove him, it'll make him a martyr. He'll use that, the sympathy, which was what he was using, emotional manipulation. He said it'll make it worse. I don't feel that's right. And then they said, what if he was to resign, or, various situations. And they told him the words, look on the screen. Every leader said, Pastor Mitchell, the only one who can go and take the church is you. Okay, if we send anybody else, our words we used was, Pastor, it's going to be a bloodbath. Now, I'm the only one who has citizenship. I have dual. I'm an American and an Australian citizen. I could have gone, but I said, number one, who's going to help Dad? But more than that, even if I go, it'll be worse. It'll be a bloodbath. That man has spent years lying, seeding. No. And we said, Dad, you need to go. And this is what Dad said. He said, I am 80 years old. Nelda is 75. He said, I don't think I can do it. I just can't. At age 80, going in, knowing it's going to be a fight, that was it. I want to tell you, for these guys, they can see in the big picture, but it's very personal. This is our family. These are our friends. This is our church. But that was Dad said, I don't think I can do it. The Board of Elders summoned this man. Basically, a summons means we ordered him to come to conference in January of 2009 for a Board of Elders meeting. We are going to settle this once and for all. And so, knowing that, this man began to make moves. Really, he didn't want to come and sort it out. He wanted to leave. And so he was working on his counsel. He spoke to a man named Don Rowlandson. I name him, God bless you, Don. May God bless you, your children, your cats, everything. The blessing of God be on you. Because Don Rowlandson began to be troubled by this man and finally had begun to ask questions and had gotten information from Pastor Mitchell on the full perspective. One morning after breakfast, now the summons is there. He's being summoned to conference. He called Don Rowlandson outside and he said, Don, they've summoned me to leadership meeting. And he said, where do you stand in this? And Don Rowlandson said, if you're not in right relationship with your pastor, you have no right to pastor here and you should resign. And he said, how do I view it? I view it, Pastor Mitchell is a general. You're maybe a colonel. What you should do, you should go to America and sort this out and do what Pastor Mitchell says. That was not the answer he wanted. But that was what he told him. This man was an emotional manipulator. He would use sympathy as a weapon to manipulate people to his will. Daryl reminded me of this. He said at some point we were discussing this when there was a conflict. Apparently I told Daryl, I said, I predict this Sunday he will cry in church. And Daryl then thought, well, I was a prophet, because sure enough, that Sunday he was talking about Saul persecuting David, and he began to cry. That was how he operated. So when Don Rollinson said, no, you need to sort this out, he called a council meeting. He had a 3-man council. One was Don Rollinson, who now is clearly seeing what he's about is not into him. He had another man that was a good man but had no strong opinions either way. And he had a third man who actually was a great fan of his. So he called a council meeting and he pulled on them emotionally, told them how difficult it's been. He's under such stress and pressure. The point of him telling that was so they would say, you poor man, we need you, we're behind you. He was telling them that so they would view Pastor Mitchell in a bad light. But in actual fact, Don Rollinson brought out a resignation letter and said, if you're not going to sort this out, you need to resign. The other man who had no strong opinion agreed, I think you should resign. And the man who was a fan totally misread the emotional manipulation, because he was saying, it's so difficult, it's so hard to go on. The man said, you really do need a break, you should resign. The man freaked out. He stepped outside. I got to call my wife. Got on the phone, stepped back out, and he said, I have to go home, my wife's fainted. I don't believe for a second that she fainted, but that was... The moment he left, he obviously called some people, and the council started getting calls from men attacking them. How dare you do that? But in actual fact, what it did, even the man who was a fan, it firmed their resolve. And they said, no, this is the right thing. He needs to resign. And this is powerful. And the man did it. He signed the letter and he resigned. Let's go back. I want you to look at this. Dad faxed me this. Dad sent me a fax with a photocopy from his Bible with that page. He said, Greg, can you believe it? Paul Stevens said, within 6 months, I prayed and said, Lord, this year, and he said, God did it. He resigned. We have resolved that problem. The council asked Pastor Mitchell to come and take the church. Dad told me privately, he said, I don't think I can. He's thinking about the money, and these days you got to send it electronically. He said, Greg, how will I send them? How can I take the church? I can't even send support. And there was a man who would be like Sharon Allen does in our church, the treasurer, named Charles Spadaro. I said, Charles will help you. I didn't even know if Charles was going to stay in the church, but I said, Charles is going to help you. And he did. He was a blessing. This man, Harold Warner, flew to the church when he resigned. He flew in, spent, I think, under a week